From the county road, the Harrigan barn looked like every other tired building sitting in the frozen Montana valley. Rough boards, a roof bent low under snow, a thin line of smoke drifting from the north corner like a quiet breath. Travelers passed by without slowing their horses. Nothing about the place asked for attention. Nothing warned them that beneath that barn floor a woman was building the difference between life and cold. Montana Territory, winter of 1887, was not gentle. The land did not forgive mistakes. Cold settled in early and stayed late. Wind scraped skin raw. Snow piled high and did not care how hard a family worked or how honest their intentions were. People survived by routine, by wood, by stubbornness, and by doing things the way they had always been done. Emma Harrigan had followed those rules once. Her husband had built their cabin before the fever took him in the summer of 1885. It was a proper frontier home by local standards. Thick logs, mud and straw packed into the gaps, a stone hearth set deep into the wall, oiled paper over the windows to keep the wind out. It was solid. It was respectable. It was not warm. That truth greeted Emma every morning. Ice coated the inside walls. Frost crept across the nails like white veins. Her breath hung in the air when she woke. In the small bedroom, her daughter slept pressed together under every quilt Emma owned. Rebecca was 12 and tried to be brave. Sarah was 7 and no longer tried at all. She coughed in the night. A wet, rattling cough that stayed long after sunrise and made Emma's stomach tighten every time she heard it. The main room could be kept tolerable if Emma fed the fire without rest, but the heat rose fast and escaped through the roof boards. Cold crept up from the plank floor, pulled straight from the frozen earth below. Emma woke 3 or 4 times a night to add wood. By morning, the pile outside the door had shrunk again. Wood that should have lasted days disappeared in hours. Her neighbors lived the same way. They complained about the cold at the store and after church. They laughed about it when spring came. But they had husbands, extra hands, someone to split wood while another patched gaps. Emma had her own hands, 2 growing daughters, and the feeling that she was losing ground. The moment that changed everything came on a gray February morning. Emma walked to the barn to milk the cow. Snow squeaked under her boots. Her fingers already ached before she reached the door. When she stepped inside, she stopped. It was warmer. Not warm, but different. The kind of warmth you noticed only because it had been missing everywhere else. The animals stood quietly, breath rising in soft clouds. Their bodies gave off heat that stayed trapped under the roof. The dirt floor beneath Emma's boots did not bite the way the cabin floor did. She held the milk pail and stood still longer than she meant to. The animals slept warmer than her children. The thought landed hard. It felt wrong. It also felt like an answer. Emma did not speak about it. She did not argue with neighbors or announce plans. By mid-March, when the ground softened enough to work, she began digging beneath the north corner of the barn. She worked early, before the valley woke, 1 shovel at a time. 1 bucket of earth hauled out and dumped behind the haystack. She was not building a house. She was not making a statement. She was digging toward warmth. The hole grew deeper each week. 4 feet. 6. 8. When her shovel struck bedrock, she stopped. The space measured 10 feet by 12, smaller than the cabin room above, but enough. Enough to lie down, enough to sleep. Emma lined the walls with limestone hauled from the creek bed. Each stone was split and shaped by hand. The work took her through April and into May. Her hands cracked and bled. Some mornings her back refused to straighten. She rested when she had to. Then she kept going. The ceiling mattered more than anything else. The barn floor above had to hold animals, equipment, and snow. Collapse was not an option. Emma salvaged heavy timber beams from an abandoned claim 5 miles north. She set them across the space and notched them into the stone walls so the weight rested on bedrock, not soil. Between the beams, she fitted split planks tight together, then packed 6 inches of clay on top for insulation. From inside the barn, nothing looked different. The floor stayed solid. The animals stood where they always had. For heat, Emma found a small cast-iron stove from a burned cabin and hauled it home piece by piece. The stovepipe ran through the stone wall. then up the outside of the barn to meet the existing chimney. From the road, it looked like part of the barn itself. Ordinary, unremarkable. Ventilation worried her more than heat. She drilled a narrow shaft straight up through the barn floor and disguised it as a support post. Fresh air entered cold and warmed as it reached the room below. Stale air rose through the stovepipe and out. Emma had heard stories about bad air killing families in their sleep. She refused to let that happen. By early November, the space was ready. Emma moved the beds down on a quiet morning. Rebecca watched closely. Sarah held her doll tight. The room was small and low. Rough stone walls. A single oil lamp. It smelled of earth and hay and iron. Rebecca looked around and asked the question Emma knew was coming. "Are we hiding?" "No," Emma said. "We're staying warm." That night, Emma lit the stove with 6 logs and closed the trap door above. The temperature climbed and held. 58 degrees in Montana winter. It felt like comfort. The girls slept through the night. No coughing, no shivering. Emma woke once, not to feed the fire, but because she was not used to sleeping that long. She did not tell anyone. Word found its way out anyway, the way it always did. Children talked. A comment here, a laugh there. Half the valley knew that Emma Harrion slept under her barn. Reactions came quietly at first. Curious looks, soft questions. Then, judgment.
"It's not natural," said Mrs. Calhoun, the preacher's wife from Pennsylvania.
"Sleeping beneath animals." "She's given up," said Margaret Whitfield, whose husband ran the lumber yard. "That's what happens when a woman's left alone too long." The men said less, but what they said carried weight. They talked about safety, about load-bearing, about things done the right way. A carpenter named Samuel Greer stopped by one afternoon to check fence posts. He noticed the changes and asked to see them. Emma showed him. He stood in the underground room, eyes moving from beams to walls to stovepipe. "This is a fine way to suffocate," he said gently, "or get crushed when those beams settle." Emma answered calmly. The beams rested on stone. The air had 3 paths. The stove drew clean. Greer nodded, unconvinced. "I hope you're right," he said, "for your girl's sake." Emma returned to her chores. The comments did not stop. No one wished her harm. They simply waited. Different meant wrong. Strange meant dangerous. They expected failure. Emma did not argue. She did not defend herself. Each night, she climbed down the ladder. Each morning, she woke warm. Her woodpile lasted longer. Her daughters looked healthier. That was enough. By January, the valley settled into routine winter misery. Fires burned day and night. Smoke hung low. People told themselves that suffering was just part of the season. Then the weather changed. On January 11th, the sky darkened without warning. Wind rose fast and hard. Snow came sideways, thick and blinding. The temperature dropped past 0 and kept falling. The blizzard had begun, and everything the valley believed about warmth and shelter was about to be tested. The blizzard did not arrive gently. It came like something angry and alive. By nightfall on January 11th, the wind screamed across the valley, slamming snow against walls and windows with a force that felt personal. Trees bent and cracked. Fence lines vanished. The world beyond arm's reach disappeared into white motion. Inside the cabins, families scrambled. Chimneys that normally pulled smoke upward began to fail when the wind shifted. Smoke rolled back into rooms, burning eyes and throats. Parents faced a choice no one wanted. Open a window and lose heat, or keep it shut and choke slowly. Most cracked the window and fed the fire harder. Wood disappeared fast. What had been stacked for weeks shrank by the hour. Fires that usually needed tending every few hours demanded attention every 40 minutes. Sleep came in short, broken stretches. Children cried from the cold. Adults lied and said it would pass soon. By morning, the temperature had dropped to 31 below 0. The storm did not weaken. Snow fell sideways, driven by winds that howled without pause. You could not see the barn from the cabin. You could not see the cabin from the road. The world had narrowed to whatever shelter you were already in. In the Whitfield house, Margaret Whitfield sat wrapped in blankets with her children pressed against her. The hearth roared, but the room never climbed above 38 degrees. Her husband fed the fire until his hands cracked and bled. The younger children began to shake. By afternoon, one had a fever. At the Calhoun place, dry wood ran out on the second day. What remained outside was frozen and buried. They burned the kitchen table, then the chairs. By night, they pulled apart bed frames and fed them to the fire, one slat at a time. 10 miles south, Samuel Greer stayed with another family. Their chimney cracked under the stress of extreme heat, meeting extreme cold. Smoke poured into the room. They sealed it off and went without fire for 18 hours, huddled together and waiting for the wind to ease enough to risk a small flame. Across the valley, the same story repeated. Fire, smoke, cold, exhaustion. People counted hours instead of days. They did not talk about comfort. They talked about endurance. Emma Harrien's routine barely changed. On the first morning of the storm, she fed the animals extra hay. More food meant more body heat. Then she climbed down through the trap door, closed it above her, and lit the stove with 6 logs. The room warmed steadily, 56 degrees within an hour. The wind did not reach her. The earth held firm. The stone walls absorbed heat and stayed warm long after the fire settled into coals. Emma added 2 logs in the afternoon, 2 more in the evening. That was it. Her daughters sat at the small table and did their lessons by lamplight. They ate hot soup. They slept under 2 blankets instead of 5. Sarah's cough softened, then faded. For the first time in months, Emma slept without waking to check the fire. Above them, the storm raged. Below it, the room held steady. From the outside, almost no one noticed. Emma's chimney gave off only a thin trail of smoke, nothing like the heavy plumes pouring from every other building in the valley. No one paid attention. Everyone was too busy trying not to freeze. The storm lasted 3 days. By the time the wind finally dropped on the morning of January 14th, the valley looked wounded. Snow lay piled against doors and fences. One cabin roof had partially collapsed under the weight. 2 families had lost livestock. Everyone was exhausted. Wood piles were gone or close to it. Furniture was missing. People looked older than they had a week before. Joseph Kerna stood outside his cabin and stared at what remained of his firewood. 3 weeks of supply had vanished in 3 days. His youngest child sat inside with 2 fingers wrapped in cloth, the skin pale and numb. Frostbite, even though the fire had never died. As Joseph pulled on his coat, something else caught his eye. Emma Harrien's woodpile still stood tall. It looked almost untouched. The thought bothered him enough that he trudged through thigh-deep snow to her property. He knocked on the barn door. Emma opened it, pitchfork in hand, her breath steady, her face tired, but not broken. "Mrs. Harrien," he said, uncomfortable, "I need to ask you something." She listened as he spoke, about the wood, about the cold, about his children. When he finished, she nodded once. "You want to see where we slept?" She moved the feed sacks aside and lifted the trap door. Warm air rose from below, clear and unmistakable. Joseph felt it on his face and froze where he stood. Emma climbed down first. Joseph followed. The underground room was dim but calm. The stove was cold. It had not been lit since the night before, yet the air was nothing like the air outside. Joseph pulled a small thermometer from his coat, a habit from years of watching livestock. He waited. 58 degrees. 14 hours after the fire had gone out, he walked the space slowly. Dirty. Dirty. The walls were dry. No ice. No frost. The air smelled of stone and hay, not smoke or dampness. "How many logs?" he asked. 6 to 10 a day, Emma said. "During the storm, maybe 10. Joseph swallowed. His family had burned 40 a day and still shivered. "You were right," he said quietly. Emma shook her head. "I was cold." He climbed out and stood in the barn, thinking. Before he left, he asked if he could bring his wife, and maybe others. "Bring anyone who wants to see," Emma said. "I'm not hiding it." Word spread fast after that. Over the next 2 weeks, families came in ones and twos, some skeptical, some desperate. All of them climbed down the ladder and felt the difference immediately. They asked questions about the stone, about the depth, about the stove. Emma answered plainly. She did not preach. She did not defend herself. She explained what worked because it worked. The numbers spoke louder than pride ever could. Cabins burned 30 to 50 logs a day to hold 40 degrees. Emma burned 10 to keep 60. Her room stayed above freezing for hours after the fire died. The animals above added warmth, just by breathing. The earth did the rest. Samuel Greer returned in February. He inspected every beam and vent. He stood longer this time. When he climbed out, he spoke to the small crowd gathered outside. "I was wrong," he said. She was right. By the end of winter, people stopped laughing. They started measuring. They started planning. And quietly, without announcements or apologies, the valley began to change how it thought about warmth. But Emma did not know yet how far that change would go. That would come later, when spring arrived and people picked up shovels of their own. Spring came late to the valley in 1888. Snow stayed stubbornly in the shadows. The ground softened only after weeks of slow thaw. When people finally stepped outside without fearing frostbite, they did not celebrate the way they usually did. That winter had taken something from them. It had shown them how close the line really was. And it had shown them something else. Emma Harrien's underground room was no longer a rumor. It was a fact measured in logs, in temperature, in children who slept through the night without coughing. No one argued with numbers. No one argued with survival. When the ground became workable, the shovels came out. The first family to dig was the Kernis. Joseph did not build under his barn. He did not have one strong enough. Instead, he dug beneath a small storage shed, 8 feet down. 8 by 8 wide, smaller than Emma's, but built on the same idea. Stone walls, heavy beams, packed earth, a small stove. By November, his 2 youngest children slept there. That winter, they stayed healthy. The Pritchards followed. They ran a dairy and had more stone than most. They dug deeper than Emma had, nearly 10 feet, and used sandstone instead of limestone. The stone held heat even longer. Their room stayed warm enough that they stored potatoes and turnips without freezing. Food and warmth solved in one place. Others copied pieces of the idea. Some built full rooms. Some built partial shelters. Some only lowered their sleeping areas into the ground. The designs differed, but the principles stayed the same. Earth insulation, stone mass, heat where it could not escape. No one called it foolish anymore. By the winter of 1889, 5 homesteads within a dozen miles had underground winter quarters. By 1891, there were more than a dozen. People stopped explaining why they were doing it. They just did it. The words changed too. What had once been called undignified became practical. By 1890, people spoke of barn quarters without a trace of mockery. It was just another tool, like a root cellar or a smokehouse, something unglamorous that worked. Margaret Whitfield never mentioned Emma's name when she built a small underground room beneath her workshop. She called it a storage space that stayed warm. That was fine. Emma did not need credit. Samuel Greer took the idea with him to Helena. That winter, he built a boarding house with underground sleeping rooms arranged around a central masonry core. Each room held steady warmth with little fuel. Travelers asked questions. Greer answered them honestly. He did not claim invention. He described what he had seen. By 1893, the Territorial Agricultural Office printed a short pamphlet about earth-sheltered winter quarters. It listed materials and rough designs. It mentioned a widowed homesteader near 16 Mile Creek who had reduced fuel use by more than half. No name was given. Emma would have preferred it that way. She stayed on her homestead. Each winter she moved back into the room beneath the barn. Each winter she burned less wood than anyone else. Her daughters grew strong. Rebecca married a rancher from the next valley. Sarah left for Helena to teach school. They both carried the memory of warmth that did not depend on constant fire. Emma never lectured anyone. She never said she had been right. When asked how she knew it would work, she gave the same answer every time. I didn't know. I tried. She died in 1904, not from cold or collapse or bad air, but from influenza. She was 51. Her obituary mentioned her daughters, her homestead, her kindness. It did not mention the room beneath the barn. By then, it was no longer remarkable. The property changed hands over the years. The original barn was torn down and rebuilt in the 1920s, but the stone-lined room beneath remained. New owners used it for storage, potatoes, jars, tools. It stayed dry. It stayed steady. It did what it had always done. In the 1970s, a surveyor from the Historical Society found it during an assessment. He noted the hand-split limestone, the ventilation shaft, the blackened marks where a small stove had once stood. He wrote a short report and filed it away. There was no marker, no plaque, no museum exhibit, just a room under a barn, holding steady while the world above changed. That is how real survival wisdom works. It does not announce itself. It does not wait for approval. It does not care if it looks strange. It only cares if it works when it matters. Emma Harrion understood that heat rises, that stone holds warmth, that the earth beneath your feet is more stable than the air above your head. She understood that survival is not about doing things the right way. It is about doing things the way that keeps you alive. The frontier rewarded results, not appearances. It rewarded function over pride. It rewarded people who paid attention. Emma was one of them. She dug because she was cold. She built because her children were cold. She stayed warm because she refused to accept that suffering was the only option. And long after the mockery faded, long after the winters passed, that quiet choice kept proving itself true. Being warm beats being correct every single time.